Okay, excellent. First of all, thank you guys for having me. I'm the founder and the VP of Business Development for American Atomics, which I'm going to be talking to you about today. Let's start with the high level premise here for people who are not necessarily familiar with what's going on in the nuclear space in the United States right now. There's a renaissance in nuclear, and part of that is the SMR revolution, but there's also a planned build out of large scale reactors across the United States to satisfy the energy demand that's coming from the growth in artificial intelligence. The data centers that are being built by OpenAI and Google and essentially every other tech company to support this build out of the AI revolution are enormously power intensive. And these companies, by and large, don't want to power their data centers with coal and oil. They want to do it with low CO2 options, and they need baseload. And so for that, they need nuclear. The problem is that if you want to have a nuclear revolution, you need fuel for all of these reactors. And at pretty much every stage of the fuel cycle, there are choke points. And especially for the SMR part, as I'll get into in just a little bit, there are major problems with supplying the fuel that America needs to power its nuclear energy revolution. And if these problems are not solved, then the nuclear revolution is dead in its tracks, and America is going to have a major problem competing with China and the rest of the world in terms of powering its data centers and the wider AI revolution. So our solution and what we're doing as a company is focusing on taking two kinds of risks, both technical risks. The first is exploration risks, where we are targeting uh, early stage exploration projects for uranium across primarily the United States, where we can use our background and experience on the exploration side to prove up a resource and ultimately get into production of yellowcake. And then across the rest of the fuel cycle, so that's conversion and enrichment, ultimately through fabrication to create the fuel that actually ends up going into reactors, we're taking on technology risks where we identify IP at an earlier technology readiness level, say a TRL of 2 or 3, where it's maybe proven at a university or a national lab at a bench scale or something at that magnitude. We would license it and then fund co-development of those technologies to the point of a commercial pilot, where ultimately we would JV with a larger company with a balance sheet to get into production throughout the fuel cycle. So just to sum that up, we're looking at opportunities across the fuel cycle to support the build out of nuclear in the United States, where we can have leverage if we get it right. So with exploration, if we take an exploration risk on a project and we find a significant resource, there's significant leverage for the investor and for the shareholders in terms of the value accretion that can be delivered if we find a material resource. And likewise, at the technology level, if we identify a technology at an earlier stage and are able to prove it out by solving the technology, the science and engineering risks, then the upside on the other side of that is asymmetric compared to the risk that we're taking. So that's our approach as a company. Why us? So we're focused on this problem at the time of maximum tailwinds for the nuclear industry and for the build out of the fuel cycle in general. Not only is AI driving massive power demand, massive new build out of nuclear, projections that we're going to double the output from nuclear between now and 2050, but at the same time, you have supply shortages across essentially every step of the fuel cycle. Mining, milling, conversion, enrichment, all of them have massive shortages, which are creating advantageous price signals that are good for our business. We have two engines of asymmetric upside where we're going to take specific measured risks, and if we get it right, then we get asymmetric upside on the other side. One of those is exploration, which we'll talk about in a second. And the other is early stage technology throughout the fuel cycle, which again, I'll talk about as we go deeper into the presentation. We are aligned with the government in the United States, especially the federal government. We are participants in the DPA Fuel Cycle Consortium, which is an organization, essentially a sort of public-private partnership put together by the Department of Energy, inviting a number of private companies to participate to have influence on how policy is set for the build out of every element of the nuclear fuel cycle, from uranium mining up through enrichment and fabrication, and ultimately end use in the United States. So we're a founding member of that group, and again, I'll get into that a little bit and deeper into the presentation. We also focus heavily on strategic partnerships, and two specifically that I'll highlight as we go deeper in are with CVMR and DISA Technologies. And we have a couple key assets that we're moving on now and intend to explore and develop in 2026 that we're especially excited about that are the reason that you should be paying attention in the near term. So again, everyone who's on this presentation is familiar with the fact that AI has absolutely exploded over the last 2 years. You had ChatGPT come along as the first killer app in artificial intelligence, and that's exploded across dozens of different models. Every AI company is in an arms race for technical talent to acquire chips from NVIDIA and other sources. They're spending billions, indeed tens, hundreds of billions on building data centers. And all of those data centers are extremely power hungry. Uh, the total data center power consumption next year is projected to be something like equivalent to the power consumption of Japan, and that's only going to keep growing from there. So that's a major tailwind for the broader space. Anybody in energy is looking at that and seeing the major tailwind advantage. But the specifics advantage for nuclear is that it is clean in the sense that it doesn't produce CO2, which, regardless of what your feelings are on that, the tech companies view that as a major priority. But unlike solar and wind, it provides baseload power. So if the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, nuclear is still generating electricity. You have a situation in the United States where supply is especially constrained. So in 2023, the United States produced under 50,000 pounds of uranium versus the 32 million pounds of yellow cake that were consumed in the United States by the world's largest reactor fleet in 2023. And that situation hasn't changed. The United States still massively underproduces uranium versus what they need. A significant portion of their imports come from Canada, but a large portion also comes from places like Kazakhstan and Russia, which represent strategic risks. On the conversion side, there is a massive shortage, not just in the United States, but globally. On the enrichment side, there is very little enrichment activity that happens in the United States. There's some, but something like 80% of the enrichment that happens in the United States convert uranium from just a base metal into something that's actually useful for the purpose of a reactor. Uh, Most of that is happening outside the United States, and of the stuff that is surplus globally, most of that comes from Russia. And an even bigger problem is with the so-called small modular reactors, which is where a lot of the bigger wins in the nuclear space have been in terms of public markets over the last couple of years. Nano nuclear being a prominent example. The idea with the SMRs is that if you mass produce these smaller reactors, you reduce CapEx and you create predictability in terms of the regulatory approval process for each reactor. You might approve one model and then produce 1,000 of them, as opposed to having a separate approval process for each reactor that you build. And the idea with that is to massively bring down the cost curve. But these smaller reactors use a different kind of enriched uranium than the rest of the reactor fleet. The light water reactors across the rest of the United States, the 97 or so reactors, they use low enriched uranium, which is enriched to about 3 to 5% of U-235, which is the useful fissile isotope of uranium. The type of uranium that's used in the SMRs is enriched to a much higher level, usually 15 to 20%, so-called high assay, low enriched uranium. And right now, almost none of that is produced in the United States. In fact, the only commercial production of HALEU at scale anywhere in the world comes from Russia. And that has been a major blocker for commercial deployments of some of these new SMR designs throughout the United States because companies literally can't get the HALEU that they need in order to spin up their first commercial reactors. The WNA projects massive shortfalls across pretty much every step of the uranium fuel cycle going out to 2050. Mining, massive shortfalls, and that doesn't come on fast. Conversion, massive scarcity. That's the part of the step where they take yellow cake, they turn it into uranium hexafluoride gas, and they send it to the centrifuges to be converted into enriched uranium. The world has nowhere near the conversion capacity that it needs. Likewise, with enrichment itself, we have significant shortfalls. So all along the fuel cycle, all of the steps that are needed, the industrial capacity, the mining capacity that's needed to fuel this nuclear revolution, we are producing significantly less versus what we need. These bottlenecks represent opportunities, and the key risks with asymmetric upside that we've talked about taking as a company are positioned all the way along the fuel cycle. And again, this isn't just an economic problem, it's also a national security issue, which is why the United States used their DPA powers or Defense Production Act powers to put together a consortium to solve it. It's a massive national security issue if you're shifting to powering a significant part of the U.S. economy with nuclear reactors and especially with SMRs, where the fuel, at least today, for the SMR for most of the SMR designs, 99% of it comes from Russia. Obviously, that's untenable. So, opportunity number one is exploration and milling, where we're looking for assets in the United States where we can apply our exploration experience, and we'll get into the team in just a second to elaborate on what our skill sets look like there. And the most important project that we have from an exploration standpoint is Big Indian. Big Indian is our Lisbon Valley acquisition. To give you some context on why it's important, up until 1952 in the United States, there was almost no commercial uranium production. It was a byproduct of mining for vanadium and radium. So all of the uranium that went into the Manhattan Project and then the weapons program and the civilian program in the United States, the bulk of it was coming from Africa and Canada, almost none from the US itself. Then in 1952, a guy named Charles Steen starts drilling a few exploratory holes in a place called Lisbon Valley, and he finds the Myvita mine, which becomes the first mine in the Lisbon Valley district. Which at one point there was a period of time it produced 100% of the uranium for the weapons program and a significant part for the commercial program in the United States. In total, 78 million pounds of uranium came out of Lisbon Valley at an average grade of 0.37%, which to give you some context on that, the head grade at White Mesa, which is the only uranium mill currently active in the United States, is 0.2%. So 0.37 would be considered extremely high grade. Lisbon Valley is what's known as a salt anticline. And a salt anticline structure is basically a big old salt dome, and it was formed hundreds of millions of years ago. Uranium was deposited on both sides of typically is deposited on both sides of the dome. The dome collapses and becomes a valley, and then several hundred million years later, miners come along, and again, in most of these cases, they find deposition, equal deposition on both sides. So in the case of Lisbon Valley, there's a fault that runs down the middle of the valley, and the strata that the uraninite is deposited on the west side is significantly shallower than on the east side. So the 78 million pounds that were produced and came out of Lisbon Valley between the 50s and the late 80s, all of that came out of the west side. So the assumption has always been that there would be significant uranium resources on the east side of the valley as well. Only instead of at 200 feet, it would be between 2,000 and 2,700 feet at somewhat more depth. But the speculation would be that if you drilled down to that level, you would find probably similar resource in the 80 to 100 million pound range at very high grades for U.S. hard rock. Between the last two uranium bulls, an oil and gas company controlled the claims on the eastern side of Lisbon Valley, and they did drilling down significantly through that 2,000 foot level. They went down to 6,000 feet. They're oil and gas drillers, so they didn't pull core, so we don't have assays for any of that. But they had gamma logs that showed extremely anomalous readings at the depths where you'd expect to find this uraninite deposition. So essentially, background radiation, 5 or 10 times, or radiation levels 5 to 10 times higher than what you'd expect as background radiation. So more than likely, they intercepted the uraninite deposit on the eastern flank of the anticline and just had no idea that they'd hit it. We have the logs from the oil and gas company, and Charlie Steen's son, Mark Steen, has tied up the claim blocks representing 75% of the east side of Lisbon Valley, and we as American Atomics have an earn into 80% of that project in exchange for doing primarily exploratory drilling. So we're extremely excited about this project. We think that we have some very clear targets in terms of the 58 existing drill holes from the previous oil and gas company that drilled down to 6,000 feet. We have several prime drill holes that have exceptionally high gamma log readings relative to what you'd expect as background. And it is our intention over the course of the next year to drill pretty significantly through that block and prove that the long suspected eastern flank deposit actually exists down there. Uh, on this slide, you can see some of the gamma log readings. Again, this is a deposit that people have long suspected was there. It occurs at greater depth than what's on the west side, but at today's prices of uranium, if we hit a deposit that's averaging 0.37%, that's $600 or $700 rock. So even at those prices, at today's prices of uranium, that is very economic rock for us to go underground for. Hmm. This is just a depiction of the claim block. In addition to the Big Indian project, we also have another set of assets in Colorado. This one has an existing 43101, older one, with 440,000 pounds of inferred U3O8 and about 3 million pounds of vanadium. All of the uranium deposits in this area are pretty heavy in vanadium. And this one represents a possible near-term producer if there's an additional milling solution in the neighborhood, and Lisbon Valley is just across the border, then this resources like this one that are currently orphaned, you can extract from here, ship it to the mill that we would anticipate building at Lisbon Valley, and extend the mill life through an M&A process of acquiring these orphan deposits. Our second high-level opportunity is to license and develop fuel cycle technology deeper into the fuel cycle at the conversion enrichment steps, especially enrichment. And the idea here is that you look for technology that's either in the U.S. National Lab System or at universities where work was done up to the limits of what those entities are able to do just with their own funding. You license it from that point and co-develop the IP and take it to the point of commercialization. So we're in the process right now of doing due diligence on a number of technologies that we think could be very commercial and very disruptive across the fuel cycle, and especially at the enrichment phase, where again, there's a huge commercial opportunity for both low enriched uranium and the HALEU that is currently only produced at commercial scale in Russia that's key for the SMR revolution. Uh, as I mentioned earlier, we are participants in the DOE DPA Fuel Cycle Consortium. What that means is we're invited to participate on panels and in discussions with DOE that sets policy for the nuclear fuel cycle in the United States. As an example, at the first DPA day, which I participated in, we were invited to recommend policy changes. And the number one policy change that we recommended was adding uranium to the critical minerals list. 2 weeks after that event, there was an executive order, and it was added to the critical minerals list. There's a number of other policy actions that we've recommended that are in the process, to my understanding, and being worked through. But this gives us a voice directly at the federal government level and makes us one of the selected companies that have been chosen to help build out the fuel cycle in the United States. In terms of our key partnerships, a couple I'd like to point out. CVMR, we have a joint venture to build a uranium mill on the Colorado Plateau. They are a milling and refining technology company. Their business model is to do joint ventures with producers around the world. Their core technology is chemical vapor metal refining, especially with nickel, but they work with about a dozen metals in something like 20 countries around the world. They have existing relationships with DOE, DoD, Oak Ridge National Labs. So that's an important partnership of ours. They're a potential source for technologies that we would co-develop, uh, again for deeper into the fuel cycle. Our other key relationship is with a company called DISA Technologies that's developed something called high pressure slurry ablation. It's a benefaction technology that is able to take waste piles and extract the remaining uranium from them without using caustic chemicals and reclaim the sites and then take the uranium and send it to a mill where it can actually be monetized. They have the only license to do this on waste piles in the United States. And it's our anticipation that at some point in the near future, they'll be approved for use at active mine sites, in which case, orphan deposits like our Blue Streak project as part of the Nuvemco acquisition become much more economic because you can produce, you can reduce the volume of the and weight of the ore by about 80% with 85 to 90% recovery of the uranium, and then you can then ship it to a mill significantly further away. So that's a key partnership for us. In terms of our leadership team, I think the most important person to point out here is Terry Lynch, our chairman, and one of the directors, the founder of Power Metallic. Uh, the the value in that company was entirely built with exploration in the drill bit. We know how to explore. We know how to prove up a deposit and to do it in a way that delivers investor value. Power Metallic was the top performing mining company of last year, and our anticipation is that once we get into the exploration cycle with Big Indian, that we will also be producing uh, substantial investor milestones. The rest of the team has extensive backgrounds in capital markets, mining, and they're the core group pushing this thing forward. Some of the important advisors I'd like to just point out here, Adam Falkoff is our lead in terms of relations with the U.S. government. He is the his firm and him specifically are the he's the lead lobbyist for Amazon Web Services, so he's very plugged in with big tech, very plugged in at the U.S. government level, and was instrumental in getting us into the DPA Fuel Cycle Consortium. Dr. Eric Hunter is one of the top experts in the United States on uranium metallurgy and geology. Dr. Paul Salagi, not doctor, has extensive experience on the ground in Utah with the uranium industry and knows everybody down there. So we have an incredible footprint on the ground there. Craig Oki Howell, he's an MSHA instructor, longtime uranium miner. So this isn't This isn't a case of tying up a project from Vancouver or Toronto and not having boots on the ground. We actually have a team on the ground who can execute on the exploration program. We have a very tight share structure. Uh, it's my understanding that something like half the shares of the company are not even deposited from DRS format, so they're not actually technically even tradable. No warrants out, so it's very tightly held. The founding group holds pretty significant share position in the company, and I think those are sort of the key things that you should know about Power Metallic. So I'll maybe open it up for questions if we have a little bit more time.
All right. Thank you very much for the presentation, Conor. You touch a lot at the beginning about energy consumption, about renewables, and so on. What is the switch that you see in the US, both from the presidency, but also from industry-driven needs? We tend to kind of put one on the shoulder of the other one, but they're two very
Yeah.
much separated things. So, what is this message from the industry?
So the message from the industry is they need more baseload power because you cannot have a situation where you're training a $10 billion AI model where all of a sudden you get a brownout and your data center goes down and you've literally lost $5 billion of compute. That's catastrophic. So you need something that's not going to cut out on you. And for that, you have fossil fuel sources and you have nuclear. And for these tech companies, they're not, building large coal-fired power plants like China is. So they're reactivating Three Mile Island and they're investing in nuclear. They're investing in the SMR business, and they're doing that because they know currently the only solution. And that's why you're seeing politicians on both sides coming out in favor of nuclear. That's why you're seeing the Sierra Club come out and say, "Hey, nuclear maybe isn't so bad after all." So it's a situation where they know that they need it, and so the politicians and the media who are downstream from business have come around to starting to cheerlead it or at least tolerate it.
Well, this is always great to see because when the push is coming from the industry, it always makes more sense than when it's just politically motivated. It usually makes stronger movement, and you already see investment coming, obviously, into the market, into the nuclear energy sector. And so, Conor will be very happy to continue following the story, seeing the updates, seeing what's happening on your side, and hopefully seeing you another time in our next IIF. So, thank you very much for the presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Cheers.
Thank you, Conor. Bye bye.